Shalom from Jerusalem. Ahlan wa sahlan. This is Dan Diker and my dear friend, colleague, and co-host Khaled Abu Toameh. This is our Middle East, Al-Sharq Al-Awsat Lana. This is a podcast that Khaled and I have been talking about doing for years and years, an insider view of Israel and the Middle East. Israel is a small, indigenous family member in a region of minorities, Khaled. This is what many people don't realize, that Israel in the West and in the Arab world has been considered, one half of a very, very tense relationship opposite the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinians. That's the way Israel's been framed in the West. And you and I know that the reality is totally different. It's totally different.
Yeah, I agree. Now, we're talking about two conflicts, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the Israeli-Arab conflict. And I want to make a separation between them because until a few years ago, or probably 10, 15 years ago, people used to talk about the Israeli-Arab conflict. And the impression I have is that many people in the Arab world, especially those in the Gulf, they're saying, wait, we don't have a conflict with Israel. What is a conflict? And they stopped using that term, the Israeli-Arab conflict, because they see themselves as not being part of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Abraham Accords reinforced that. What we saw over there is, some Arab countries saying, okay, we are disconnecting ourselves from the Palestinian question. We don't want to be part of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We want to solve our problems with Israel, if we have any, through peace agreements, through normalization, things that the Palestinians are totally opposed to. We all know that the Palestinians have not changed, Dan. The Palestinian position remains anti-normalization, anti-concessions, anti-compromise, anti-any attempt to broker peace between Israel and the Arab countries. And on that track, the Israeli-Palestinian track, we see no progress. And I'm sorry to tell you, I'm not optimistic. I'm optimistic only regarding the future relations between Jews or Israel and the Arab countries. But I'm not optimistic when it comes to relations between Israel and the Palestinians.
This is what our Arab friends in the Gulf are saying. It's not only Khaled Abu Toameh, an Israeli-Arab, leading Israeli-Arab Muslim commentator, analyst, and journalist for almost 4.5 decades. So people might say, well, Khaled, you're within the Israeli reality, not only Diker, but Abu Toameh. But that's not the case. You and I, we might as well start our conversation by doing a little a head twister for our listening audience. You and I were recently, through our Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, where I serve as president, you serve as a senior fellow, involved in very unusual backroom discussions. One with a top-level Sudanese group.
And I can tell you, Dan, as an Arab Muslim living here in Israel, this is the first time I meet people from Sudan.
Is that right?
And I was really excited, yes.
Yeah, so
I've never met people from Sudan ever, not abroad and not here.
And here they come. We had a secret meeting with them in Herzliya, in Ramat HaSharon, near Tel Aviv. And these are really top-level people who were here on invited by some of the top officials of the Israeli government.
Yeah, one of them a very senior or a former senior official with the defense ministry in Sudan and very close to the ruler, the government.
Burhan, Ken, absolutely. And what did they say to us both in this closed meeting? They said, we want to have normalization with Israel. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm hitting myself, pinching myself. I'm sitting next to you in this room, right? And we're having Arab coffee, and we're having, and he's right across from us. And he's talking about normalization. You know what I thought about, Khaled? It's 2023. 68 years ago? It was 1967.
The three no's.
The three no's. And where did they come out of? The Arab League meeting in Khartoum, Sudan.
And here we are sitting with people from Sudan telling us, we want peace with Israel. We want normalization with Israel. We recognize Israel's right to exist. we want to live with Israel.
And we want normalization with
Yes.
Israel. Say in
Yeah.
Khartoum in 67, they said no peace, no negotiations, no recognition. And here we have the 4 yeses.
Yes, I was surprised, to be honest with you, at their openness, at their frankness. I mean, we had a military guy, we had a businessman, and we had a politician there. And the three of them, I mean, they agreed, or their statement was, we want peace with Israel, each for, Sudan needs Israel, militarily also, security. The businessman said, we can do many things with Israel. I'm a businessman, I want to do business. And the politician said, look, for many years we were told bad things about Israel. We didn't know. And now it's time for us to, take our matters into our hands and come here and move forward. We want to exchange delegations. That caught me by surprise. It was a pleasant surprise, of course. But this is what we need. I wish one day we will see something or people like that on the Palestinian side. We also had another important meeting this week at the JCPA with a woman from
Bahrain, a senior journalist from Bahrain.
and writer.
And commentator.
A very brave woman.
Very much so.
Ahdiya Ahmad al-Sayyid. I ran into her or interviewed her, let's say, about 2.5 years ago for the first time. And when I called her and she heard that my name is Khaled from Jerusalem, she was worried. And I asked her, well, she said, let me get back to you. And she checked me and she went and Google searched me. And when I asked her, what's your problem? What are you afraid of? She said, I'm being attacked by many Palestinian journalists for speaking out in favor of peace with Israel. And I thought you were one of them. You're just another Arab there. I told her, no, I'm a different Arab. I'm an Arab who believes in peace, who believes in promoting normalization. And since then, we became friends. And I really admire her courage. And I think it was like her second or third visit to Jerusalem, to Israel. And we were proud to have her at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. She came there, and we even had a very special podcast with her in Arabic, which will be distributed very soon. And she said very powerful things. She said, she talked in favor of peace with Israel. She criticized Palestinian leadership, calling them failed leadership, for dragging their people from one disaster to another, for never offering hope. She spoke out against Hamas. These are views that you rarely hear in the Arab.
Well, this is exactly why you and I, for years, have talked about doing what you have called Al-Sharq al-Awsat Lana, our Middle East, the insider view. And the JNS, by the way, our wonderful partners at JNS have thought about this subtitle, an insider's view of the Middle East, because that's our view. You would not hear this in the Western media. You don't hear this in the New York Times. You don't hear this on CNN. You don't even hear this on Fox. The Middle East is constructed of millions and millions and millions of minority ethnic groups and minority communities. Whether it's Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, and we have 2 million Israeli Arab Muslims, and including Christians, and we have Druze who are wonderful members of our society, and we even have Baha'i, and we even have refugees who are living here and succeeding here from Eritrea and South Sudan and other areas. So
what we're saying, Dan, is that Israel can be integrated in the Middle East.
And that's what our Arab partners are saying, right?
Absolutely.
That's what the idea.
We're finding Arabs who are also Muslims saying it, Christians saying it around us, and that surprises me. Why? Because it comes at a time when Israel is being delegitimized, when Israel is being demonized, when the Palestinian Authority and other parties are trying to isolate Israel in the international community, when they are inciting against normalization with Israel. And here come these Arabs, and here comes the JCPA, and promotes this idea that no, this Middle East does not belong only to the radicals. It does not belong to Hamas and Mahmoud Abbas. There are other Arabs. There are other Muslims. Look at them. They're reaching out. They're coming to visit Israel. They're speaking out. And that's the ultimate goal. That's the final goal. We want to show that Israel is part of this Middle East. It's not a pariah state. It's not a rogue state. It can be integrated into this region. And that's what we call our Middle East. It's for all of us. That's what we want to show.
You know, it's as you're speaking, Khaled, I'm just thinking to myself, not only are we not Israel not a pariah state, Israel is being understood by our Arab neighbors in the UAE, United Arab Emirates, in Bahrain, as you just spoke about, Adia, in Morocco, even in Sudan, as we start out our program, as the solution, not the problem to the Middle East.
Yes. Many people are looking at Israel and they're saying, we want to be like Israel. This is what we want. We want to benefit from Israeli technology. We want to benefit from the strong Israeli economy. We want to learn a lot from the Israeli democratic system, from the parliamentary system. I read a lot in the Arab, what Arab columnists write about Israel. And this really gives us hope. It's surprising that, many people in the Arab world look at Israel as a role model. At a time when the Arab world is marching backward, they see Israel marching forward. And that's very important. That's the message we want to send out. We want to reach out to these Arabs, to empower them, to invite them to the center to speak out, to come to Israel, to see for themselves how things are. We had two friends over here from South Africa and from the U.S., from the black community, Dumisani Washington and
Olga Washington, and Olga, his daughter-in-law,
Yeah.
Olga Washington, and then Olga's husband, Joshua Washington, who's senior teacher.
Yeah, they came here, and I personally took them to the West Bank, and they saw many things that surprised them in a pleasant way. They talked to Palestinians, they talked to Arabs inside Israel, and that's very important. This is what we want. We want not only the Arabs and the Muslims, but we want minorities around the world. We want people who had different perceptions about Israel, that very negative ones, like the South African man, to come here and see for themselves. And this is what we are doing at the JCPA. We are trying to promote all these things. We are trying to expose. We're trying to show the nice face of Israel. We're trying to show that, okay, maybe Israel is not perfect, but look at all the positive things that are happening.
Yeah, very much so. In fact, one of the sensitive, the touch points in the way Israel is perceived in the West is that it is entirely defined, engineered, mirrored, and presented as one half of an intractable conflict opposite the Palestinian Authority, which is really a subset of the Palestine Liberation Organization. Many people get that confused. They don't really know what some people think that Palestine was once a national entity, was once a country, when it was in fact a geographical area that was controlled. The British Mandate of Palestine was controlled, of course, after the Ottoman Empire fell by the British, by the United Kingdom, as one of four mandates in the Middle East. People have very little idea about contemporary political history.
I totally agree with you, and I can tell you, as a journalist and a speaker, a public speaker, I've met many of my colleagues, and I've met many people who I've spoken to, who come here with very little knowledge about the history of this region. I've met people who have told me that before 1948, there was something called the State of Palestine. Jerusalem was its capital, and the Jews came here and stole it. They destroyed that Palestinian state, and why don't they just give it back? So, these are the misconceptions that I'm talking about that we are trying to correct also. Part of our program at JCPA is education. Education is very important. What we write, all these projects we publish, to educate people.
So we're looking to educate people at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs as to Israel's position in the larger region. I think that's a brand new concept, because the vast majority of policy institutes, of what they call think tanks, people who engage in the battle of ideas, is to really continue this false artificial isolation of Israel only in the context of the ongoing conflict with the Palestinians as being its entire identity, when in fact Israel is a thriving liberal democracy, notwithstanding the civil strife it's going through right now, the likes of which we haven't seen in many decades.
I call it the Israeli Spring.
The Israel Spring, right? And in fact, it's interesting because the Arab Spring back in 2011-12 was coined in the West as sort of by President Obama at the time as the Arab Middle East search for democracy, when in fact it wasn't the search for democracy. It was the expression of frustration at that time with economic issues. Remember the young Tunisian cart owner who Bouazizi, who ignited himself and killed himself, was over economic frustrations. It wasn't over, this overarching desire for constitutional democracy across the Middle East. That was a real misconception at the time. But the Israeli it's funny when you use the word Israeli Spring, it really is over the rebalancing of Israeli democracy.
And I can tell you, Dan, I read and hear from many Palestinians and many Arabs that they're watching these demonstrations with admiration, and they're saying, wow, look at this. This is real democracy. What will happen to us if we go out to demonstrate on the streets of Ramallah? We get beaten up. If we go to protest on the streets of Jordan, we clash with the security forces. In Lebanon, the same. So people look at they watch these things, and they learn, and they admire it. Don't think that they ignore it. They appreciate the Israeli democratic system. They know that people in Israel have freedom of speech, freedom of the media, that they can criticize the government, they can demonstrate against the government in the tens of thousands, and at the end of the day, not one person is even injured. And this gives you hope that these people look at Israel, as I said, as a role model, as something that, wow. It reminds me, at the beginning of the Oslo process, the so-called peace process. I don't call it a peace process, by the way. I'm talking about the Oslo Accords that were signed in 1993 between Israel and the PLO. When I used to ask many Palestinians, what do you expect now? What's going to happen? What type of government do you think you're going to have right now? The answer I used to get from many of them, we hope we'll get a democracy like Israel. The last thing we want is a dictatorship. We hope we'll have our own Knesset. We hope, we'll see open debates on TV. Palestinians learned a lot from the Israeli democratic system. They were exposed to it.
And they were frustrated because 30 years after Oslo, there have been books written by Arab authors, by Jewish and Christian authors about the profound collapse of that dream. The dream has exploded into a nightmare, not because Israel is building porches in Gush Etzion and in areas of Samaria, but because, as Said Abu Rish wrote in his book, from defender to dictator is the English translation of what Said Abu Rish wrote, is that Arafat became the very dictator and Mahmoud Abbas became, the corrupt monarch, if you will.
Let me correct you, Dan. When you say became, you're assuming that before the Oslo Accords, Yasser Arafat was not a dictator. No, I'm familiar with Yasser Arafat's tactics. I've read a lot about Arafat. I've interviewed many Palestinians. I even visited Tunisia in 1991 and talked to many people there, senior PLO officials. Arafat was always a dictator. He ran the PLO as a one-man show. And those who were very familiar with Arafat's tactics and brutal measures and his crackdown on political opponents, they knew that if you bring Yasser Arafat to the West Bank and Gaza, he's not going to establish a democracy. It will be anything but a democracy. And those people turned out to be right, Unfortunately, many people in Israel and many people in the international community did not heed the warnings that were sent out by people who knew Arafat. And now Mahmoud Abbas, he belongs to the same clique.
You called them the Abus.
Yeah, you look at I've been covering Palestinian affairs for 40 years. And I go to Ramallah, and it's the same people running the show. Abu Mazen, Abu Ala, Abu Muhammad, it's like, the average age today, Dan, of the Palestinian leadership is 76. The youngest guy was Saeb Arikat, by the way, who passed away in 2020 from COVID. But I look at the Palestinian leadership now, and I see, I see a group of elderly people, the old guard, running the show, suppressing the emergence of new leadership. refusing to share power. And it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for the Palestinians before it's a tragedy for Israel, by the way.
What happens to people in the West? You've got all these observers. You have Tom Friedman, and you have, you have a lot of scholars and observers and commentators. People give the Palestinian Authority a pass. It's been described as the bigotry of low expectations. They refuse, many people in the West, not everyone, but they refuse to assign moral agency to the Palestinian Authority. And having been here for almost 34 years, it really boggles the mind as to how people believe this notion of strong is wrong, or the perception of strong is wrong and weak is right. So as long as I remember former Defense Minister Moshe Bogi Ya'alon used to tell me when he was a scholar at it was the Adelson Institute, actually, at part of Shalem Center, when that institute was thriving for a number of years. And he used to say, Mahmoud Abbas's weakness is his strength.
Yes, absolutely. The Palestinians have succeeded in presenting themselves as victims. And people will, or as the underdog. And people in the international community will always identify with the underdog or the so-called weak people. I first sensed that, Dan, during the first Intifada, because the first Intifada, which erupted in 1987, presented a picture of Palestinian children throwing stones at the heavily armed Israeli soldiers. And the pictures you saw in the media back then were mostly of Palestinian children or young people, teenagers, standing in front of tanks and armored vehicles and Israeli soldiers. And as far as the international community was concerned, this is not and there is no balance here between the two sides, and that's why the sympathies of most people went to the Palestinians. Now, this hasn't changed since then. Some people would argue that during the second Intifada, which erupted in 2000, because of the use of suicide bombings and other terror methods, the Palestinians lost sympathy, and they were no longer seen as the good guys versus the bad guys. But many people in the international community held them responsible for terrorism. Now, this is where Abu Mazen steps in, and he says, "Oh, we made a strategic mistake by resorting to suicide bombings, by militarizing the Intifada. We should have kept it as a popular resistance." You see, Abu Mazen is not saying it's morally wrong to carry out terror attacks or anything like that. He's just saying, as a tactic, it was a mistake. We shouldn't have done that.
It wasn't wrong morally or in principle.
Yes. It was just wrong. I mean, we chose the wrong method. We should, resist Israel. We should attack Israel, but we did it. Let's not use suicide bombings. Let's use other means. He calls it a popular resistance. Now, in the eyes of many Palestinians, popular resistance could include car ramming attacks, stabbings, shootings, hurling Molotov cocktails or stones at a car driven by a pregnant woman on the streets of the West Bank. I mean, this is it remains an open conflict with Israel. This is the Palestinian strategy to keep the conflict open and keep it, going through different phases. Once it's an armed resistance, once it's the popular resistance, and the perception of the international community will not change, unfortunately. I also say that the media plays a very big role in creating this image of good guys versus bad guys, as the Goliath versus the David.
We're the Indians. There were, to talk about woke and politically incorrect analogies. America has had for so many years cowboys and Indians. John Wayne, and I think Israel's been recast as sort of the once understood, if not racist and bigoted idea of the primitive American Indian, now today called Native Americans. Israel has been recast today as a terrorist organization like the PLO, and the PLO in the West has been recast as the virtuous, struggling Jews in their, in their sort of nascent, fledgling nation state.
Yes,
It's a
and
complete inversion.
Look at the sympathy and the support they're gaining on the campuses in the U.S., in Canada, and elsewhere, because the Palestinians have managed to present themselves as, fighters for freedom, fighters against oppression, repression, against an occupation. And it's like, look, we are, innocent civilians clashing with an army. We're just, demanding our rights. And because of that, we're being suppressed. So these are the messages that are being sent out, and they do resonate with many people. And this is what is promoting anti-Semitism, and it's even endangering the lives of Jews worldwide.
This is what people misunderstand on university campuses. There are hundreds of university campuses in which organizations that sound very innocent and even virtuous, like Students for Justice in Palestine. SJP is an organization that was founded by a Hamas loyalist, Hatem Bazian, who is a professor at Berkeley, and as FDD and the FDD scholars, Jonathan Schanzer he testified before Congress on this point, that American Muslims for Palestine, AMP, was an organization that he chaired, and then from that founded the Students for Justice in Palestine many years ago. People think that it just cropped up the other day, but it didn't. And that the Students for Justice in Palestine is not a pro-Palestinian Authority organization. They're a pro-Hamas and an opposition group organization within the PLO. For example, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is a Marxist-Leninist terror organization founded in the 1970s, and the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, which is a Marxist organization founded soon after the PLO was headed by the second PLO charter in 1968, and then Arafat took the chairmanship reins in 1969. These opposition groups and Hamas that are included in the PLO under the PLO umbrella are those groups that are supported by Students for Justice in Palestine. And you've made the point.
I've met some of these people, Dan, and first of all, I discovered that it's not about being pro-Palestine. They're not pro-Palestine. It's more about hating Israel. I also discovered that many of them were not even Palestinians, by the way. And I told them, look, if you want justice in Palestine, what about justice for women and gay people living under Hamas in Gaza? I mean, why don't you fight for that type of justice? What about justice for Palestinians living under the Palestinian Authority, human rights activists, journalists who are being imprisoned, persecuted by the Palestinian Authority? But if you want justice for the Palestinians, spewing hatred against Israel on a campus does not make you pro-Palestinian. That doesn't bring justice to the Palestinians. You're just Israel haters. And I would like to see you do something good or positive for the Palestinians. Now, regarding the comment that they are even against the Palestinian Authority, I agree with that. I heard from some of them, actually several people belonging to these so-called pro-Palestinian groups, that the Palestinian Authority and Mahmoud Abbas are traitors. And when I asked them why, what did they do? They said, these guys recognized Israel's right to exist. These guys are working with Israel in the West Bank through security coordination. These guys believe in promoting normalization with Israel. These are exactly the positions of Hamas, the PFLP and the DFLP. So we're talking about groups that are, first of all, promoting hatred or spewing hatred against Israel, and anti-Semitism. And secondly, they're against any prospects for peace because they don't believe in Israel's right to exist.
Absolutely. Abu Marzouk, the Hamas international relations official, Musa Abu Marzouk, he was the one back in the early 2000s that was receiving the financial benefits of the Holy Land. Remember the Holy Land terror financing case, which was all a Hamas terror financing operation. Well, he got out, he avoided American justice. And the Students for Justice in Palestine of today, the Palestinian Solidarity Committee of today, on these college campuses are the result of that type of Hamas activity that is being today operated out of Turkey, operated out of Gaza, even operated out of cities in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank.
And where's the international community?
They're nowhere. They don't understand it. See, this is one of the reasons we have undertaken this podcast, an insider view of the Middle East. Our Middle East is to put all of this in context and to show that being taking a critical view of the Palestinian Authority is not an anti-Palestinian position.
It's actually a pro-Palestinian position. People like you and me are much more pro-Palestinian than many of these Israel haters on the campuses, because myself and you and JCPA, we want to see a good life for the Palestinians. We are saying the Palestinians deserve better than this. We are saying we want an end to corruption, which is good for the Palestinians. We are saying we want to see Palestinian leaders held accountable. So do many Palestinians, by the way, according to all public opinion polls. If 75% of the Palestinians are saying we want to see President Abbas resign, and if 88% of the Palestinians are saying the Palestinian Authority is corrupt, they're actually being much more extreme than myself and you in that. So being pro-Palestinian means that you demand something that is good for the Palestinians, but spewing hatred against Israel does not make you pro-Palestinian. We're actually helping the Palestinians more than other people in the international community, because we are highlighting all these negative things that the Palestinians are suffering from. The incitement is awful. The incitement that is spearheaded by the Palestinian Authority, because that's poisoning the hearts and minds of the young people. It's bad for the Palestinians before it's bad for Israel, by the way.
Absolutely. Khaled, just to add on to your comment before coming back to you, in the last 2 weeks in Israel, there have been 5 major terror attacks, and we call them Palestinian teen terrorists. These are young people, 13 and 14 years old, who carried out the majority of those 5 terror attacks, in which killed a 6 and an 8-year-old brothers in remote by a young Palestinian driving.
And don't tell me they did it because of poverty or despair. I've been to the homes of 2 of them, and I can tell you, middle-class families, parents working. The wife of the Khairi Alkam, the wife of the man who carried out the attack in Ramot, she was working in the Jerusalem municipality.
Yeah, right. That's right. And now
she had a good job.
She's up for termination.
But again, these are not people who are driven by poverty and misery.
Despair, socioeconomic despair.
No. It's very obvious that these are people who are influenced by what they watch on social media, by the messages that are sent to them by Palestinian leaders, by what's being said in the mosques. This is all the result of this massive campaign of incitement against Israel.
So this is another topic that you and I are focusing on at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, along with other colleagues like Brigadier General Yossi Cooperwasser, and our wonderful board members and intellectual leaders on the American side, like Sandra Gerber, who's really been an extraordinary teacher and leader on all these issues. And it all started back in PMW, Palestinian Media Watch, did a great job in 2014 publishing the first pay to slay set of research, and then Yossi Cooperwasser, through our partnership with Sandra Gerber in 2016, published the really formidable and determinant text called Allocations to Palestinian Terrorists and Their Families, and that became known as Pay to Slay or Money for Murder, and it led to 2 pieces of legislation, one in the United States, which is called the Taylor Force Act, and then one in Israel, which was called the freeze legislation, or the what they call Chakikat Kizuz, Choka Kizuz, which means the holding of tax revenue payments that the State of Israel collects on behalf of the Palestinian Authority. What I just had the opportunity to testify in the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee of the Knesset, and said around that table, Khaled, that in 2022, the State of Israel collected 11,200,000,000 shekels on behalf of the Palestinian Authority, which is 68% of their 2022 operating budget. And a lot of that money is going to fund Palestinian incitement to murder Israelis, Palestinian promotion of the international BDS warfare campaign, Palestinian illegal, fraudulent international terrorism at the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, the United Nations, Palestinian Authority mandated theft of Israeli land in Area C, which was clearly laid out in the Oslo Accords, and as well as illegal building with European help, which is really unconscionable.
The impression one gets these days is that the Palestinian Authority is investing lots of money and tremendous energy into fighting Israel than it is into preparing their people for statehood or improving the economy or solving the problem of poverty and unemployment. Look at all this massive campaign that the Palestinian diplomatic warfare that the Palestinian Authority is waging against Israel. You see a concerted effort. You see efforts by the Palestinian Foreign Ministry, by the Palestinian ambassadors, to the ambassador to the UN, and ambassadors to the EU. You see the Palestinian government meeting every week, and Mohammed Shtaya, the Prime Minister, traveling to this country and that country. And you see a lot of diplomatic movements inside Ramallah, meeting with consuls, with ambassadors, with all kinds of diplomats from the West. And what is it all about? I don't see them, the Palestinian officials, talking about, ways of improving the Palestinian economy or ways of building institutions or another hospital. I see that most of the rhetoric, most of the efforts are being put into delegitimizing Israel, depicting Israel as a rogue state, accusing Israel of massive war crimes, of ethnic cleansing, of apartheid. I mean, it's like the same taklit, it's the same disc. There's no attempt to change the rhetoric, even to lower it down. And I say all these American, U.S., EU officials who meet with these Palestinians, don't they ever ask them these questions? It's like, where are the elections? Why don't all these parliamentarians from around the world who visit Ramallah, for example, why don't they ask President Mahmoud Abbas and other Palestinians, excuse me, where is the Palestinian parliament?
They don't ask. No, they don't ask because they give the Palestinian Authority a pass because of their perpetual perceived position profile of weakness.
Yes.
And that becomes, frankly, we mentioned it a few minutes ago, it becomes a syndrome of bigotry, of low expectations of the Palestinian Authority. And that's not what the Palestinian people are saying. They're saying, I tell you, I go to villages in Area C, Area C under full Israeli administrative and security control. And I'm not going to name the villages because it will endanger the people there. The Palestinian Authority sends muhabarat. They send intelligence people in there to beat up anyone who wants to have a normalized relationship with Israel. Anyone that wants to send Israel to Israeli hospitals and wants to send people to do normalization, what they call tatbiya, normalization projects and initiatives with.
They're saying that tatbiya, normalization, is an act of treason. Okay, if it's an act of treason, then how can we ever make peace with Israel?
There's the catch.
Yeah.
There's the catch. So in other words, if there were another 500,000 podcasts like yours and mine, we wouldn't have an Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We would be moving along what we call the Abraham Accords with the Palestinian Authority. But people in the West do not understand that it is Palestinian Authority rejectionism of Israel in totality, which began with the Soviet Union back in the 1960s, and it continued after the Soviet Union collapsed. And I mentioned to one member, by the way, former member of one of the center-left parties in Israel, who's a very fine guy, Elazar Stern, who's a very senior general military officer, was in charge of education for the IDF, was in charge of manpower for the IDF, a very, very thoughtful guy. And I said to him, I said, Elazar, you know, the problem is that in Israel, the Labor Party and all the more so the Meretz Party never learned the lessons of Oslo. They never said, let's stop, look in the mirror. Where did we go wrong? Where did we go right? Let's rethink this. The Arab world did do that. I mean, the Arab world said, wait a second. And this has been going on, by the way. I heard this I actually heard this in a podcast with Dennis Ross a couple of years ago. The Condoleezza Rice at that time, back in 2008, she was the Secretary of State under George Bush the son, George W. Bush. And she went to Saudi Arabia, and she wanted to try to sell, all kinds of, let's call it diplomatic pathways to His Excellency at that time, and MBS, and actually his father. And in fact, it didn't work because they kept saying, we're not interested in the Palestinian issue, Dr. Rice. We're interested in moving forward regionally. We're interested in fighting the Iranian regime. And he said it 3 times. The Iranian
remember former U.S. Secretary of State, John Kerry.
In 2016.
Yeah, for that famous statement.
Yeah, there will be no peace. There will be no peace other than the Palestinians before the Palestinians.
Don't expect the Arab countries to make peace with Israel before the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is resolved. And the Abraham Accords proved him to be wrong.
I mean, it was dead wrong. They did, the Arab world and Israel, they did an end run, and the United States at that moment did an end run around what was called the veto over Arab-Israeli normalization, the veto over Arab-Israeli peace, the veto over the future of the Middle East. And that was one of the inspirations, frankly. It was one of the inspirations for our Middle East, for this program.
That's why it's very important to invest a lot in strengthening and expanding the Abraham Accords right now.
Absolutely. And you know what? The Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, I mean, and I apologize to our listeners for being a little self-promotional here, but we're sort of doing a lot of good work in the Middle East, and we are inviting, we have Arab and African countries, 15 of them, coming to Jerusalem the end of March 2023 for the first ever security conference between Arab states, African countries, and the State of Israel in Jerusalem. Yeah. They're all coming, and even countries that don't have diplomatic relations with Israel, like Somalia, Djibouti, others. We have goodness gracious, we have Kenya coming, Nigeria coming, we have Somaliland, the little Muslim majority mini country, Somaliland.
Well, in short, JCPA is becoming Israel's embassy to the world.
Oh, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Is become.
It has to be an address. I mean, we don't want to replace the foreign ministry.
Right.
But what we
supplement. We want to supplement the foreign ministry. We want to be able to pivot where we have in some of our literature, we say that governments are forced to deal with the immediate. The Jerusalem Center deals with the important. Yeah. And it's not to say what governments do is not important. No, it is very important, but it's all immediate. It's all crisis-driven.
And also, we are people to people.
Very much so.
As opposed to governments to governments.
So here at the Middle East right now, in the last few minutes of our initial podcast with what we hope to be millions of people listening in as to what the real Middle East is all about, we stand at the precipice, really, between revolution in the Middle East and evolution. And if you look in Israel, you've got this question mark. It's a watershed moment between the extremists on the one hand and the moderates on the other. I mean, both in the 2 million strong Arab community in Israel, there are people that really want to become much more deeply involved in a civic Israeli culture. Just like, as a matter of fact, Mansour Abbas, it was a big moment actually when Mansour Abbas, notwithstanding his Islamist background, you did hear him make some very meaningful statements, such as Israel. He himself said Israel is a Jewish and democratic state. We want to be part of the Jewish and democratic state. He made comments in a synagogue in Lod during the troubles back in 2021 that were inspired by Hamas attacks against Israel, and he said this is outrageous.
He paid a price.
He did pay a price.
He's been attacked by Hamas, by Palestinian Authority people, and even by many Israeli Arabs. And kudos to him. He did not, backtrack. He's marching forward. And I think he's serving the cause of the Arabs inside Israel, who want integration into Israel, not separation from Israel.
That's what we want to explore in our upcoming programs. We want to bring guests here who are, even on both sides. I like to bring guests, Khaled, who see Israel as a threat to them, and those who see Israel as the pathway to their future, and really to really reveal these inside, if you will, the inside fears and the inside story. We want to bring people the inside story of Israel and the Palestinians and the Middle East, and we're going to do it. We're going to do it together. I think that this really sums up the initial peek, P-E-E-K, into a very complex, dramatic region that is always on the precipice of collision or collaboration. Always. Both things are happening simultaneously. So it's an honor. It's an honor for me to have you as a co-host, a longtime friend and analyst, Khaled Abu Toameh, the distinguished senior scholar, senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute, as well as the Jerusalem Post, longtime Jerusalem Post commentator, analyst, and reporter. And I'm Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. This has been Al-Sharq Al-Asatlana, our Middle East. Shalom, salam from Jerusalem. This has been our first program, and we hope one of many, many. Join us for the deepest insider insights into Israel, the Palestinian issue, and the Middle East. Shalom from Jerusalem.
Thank you.